Back before it became one of gaming's most beloved franchises, before it was an automatic Game of the Year contender, before we were climbing mountains, sailing oceans, and riding dragons, or even horses for that matter, before it changed the way people looked at video games, The Legend of Zelda began as an ambitious but humble top-down side-scrolling adventure. Like many others, Ocarina of Time was my first introduction to the series when I was 7 years old. For a while, I considered myself an avid Zelda fan, but after The Wind Waker, the franchise and I grew a bit estranged. Not because I didn't like it, it's a fantastic game. I just got older, my interests shifted, and games like Twilight Princess, Skyward Sword, Spirit Tracks, and A Link Between Worlds all passed me by. Heck, I didn't even play Breath of the Wild until 2021 when my girlfriend bought a Switch to play Animal Crossing. And while I loved Breath of the Wild, it wasn't until Tears of the Kingdom, which I picked up the day it released, that I truly remembered why I loved this series so much. After finishing Tears of the Kingdom, I went on a little bit of a Zelda binge. I replayed the N64 titles, the Link's Awakening remake, played A Link's to the Past for the first time in 20-odd years, but there was one game I had never played. The one that started it all, The Legend of Zelda. Okay, that's not entirely true. I played it for like 15 minutes on the Wind Waker Collector's Edition, but this time I played it for real. And oh boy, this one was a doozy. Our journey begins, like most Zelda games, in the land of Hyrule, but unlike most Zelda games, there's no friendly NPC telling you where to go, no tutorial, no guiding patch of grass, nothing. Where do I go? Don't know. Who's Zelda? Don't know. What am I doing? Don't know. But what I do know is that there's a sword in this cave. Look, he said the thing. Much of your time spent playing The Legend of Zelda will be spent meandering about Hyrule in search of its 8 dungeons, which are technically called levels, but come on, it's totally dungeons. Within each one, you'll defeat enemies, solve puzzles, and battle a fearsome boss, granting you a heart container and a piece of the now iconic golden triangle, the Triforce. After finding all 8 pieces, you can enter the final dungeon to face off against Ganon and save Princess Zelda. The Legend of Zelda was famously inspired by Shigeru Miyamoto's childhood adventures exploring the caves and forests around his hometown of Sonobe, Japan. One of the most impressive feats of his illustrious career was how he managed to capture that experience so well on a console with about as much computing power as my toaster. And it's not even a particularly good toaster, it only does 2 slices of bread at a time and it just has the one setting that, for its time, this game is graphically very impressive. The land of Hyrule is made up of just a small handful of tiles, but manages to have distinct regions to help you find your way. It does suffer from some sameness that can make it difficult to navigate or trick you into thinking you've already been somewhere that you haven't, or even forget where you found certain things. The music repeats endlessly on a loop, and a short one at that. It's a great tune, but it can be a bit grating at times, but thankfully I died a lot to break up the monotony. It's even worse in the dungeons, with each one having the same track that's shorter and less melodically interesting. While navigating the world, you'll revisit the same screens over and over, and enemies respawn constantly. And you can try to just run by them, but some of these guys mean business, like these levers that spawn right on top of you and deal contact damage, or these Lionels that hit like trucks. While small, this early rendition of Hyrule is certainly not without its charm. It's full of these alluring little mysteries like all of these caves everywhere, or the Lost Woods where you'll just repeat the same screen until you know the pattern to get out, or this graveyard that seems a little out of place. And because it feels so out of place, you immediately know that there has to be something here. I found myself coming back here time and time again because I knew there was a secret, but it took me till I was nearly finished the game to even find out what that was. One of the best moments in the game for me was when I stumbled across this old man who told me there are secrets where fairies don't live. I remember kind of thinking like, oh, thanks bozo, that doesn't help me. But for whatever reason, the phrase stuck with me. Then later, when I came across this area that looked suspiciously like a fairy fountain, but there were no fairies to be found, things started to click. I hadn't quite found a use for the recorder yet, so I tried it, and when I tell you the dopamine hit I got from figuring this out, that is what video games are all about. That is what The Legend of Zelda is all about. And part of what makes these moments so special are the mundane ones in between. All that time spent walking back and forth, finding nothing, fighting with a constant wave of respawning enemies. This is probably the most dangerous version of Hyrule we've ever seen, one notable exception notwithstanding. It'll test not just your skills, but also your resolve. So how do we fight back? Link has a sword and shield as expected, but unlike other 2D games in the series where Link can swing his sword in sort of an arc, here we can only attack with a thrust, which means you've got to be more precise with your positioning. While at full health, you can shoot a beam from your sword, which is fun, except I rarely had full health, so I didn't get to enjoy it very often. The sword can be upgraded twice after finding the secret location and, as the old man puts it, mastering the sword, which actually means finding enough heart containers, which is a bit odd. Sword combat itself is a bit clunky due to Link's short attack range and enemies' erratic movement doesn't help. A lot of damage I took felt a little unfair at first, but once I improved, it was actually pretty satisfying to get through a room cleanly. Your shield is a passive ability, meaning it blocks incoming projectiles automatically if you're facing the right direction and not using another item at the time. The basic shield stops arrows, and later you can find an upgraded shield that blocks magic attacks as well. Many iconic Zelda items make their first appearance here. The boomerang stuns enemies and retrieves distant items, the bow and arrow can deal big damage from afar and cost a rupee per shot instead of arrows, and bombs can be used to hit multiple enemies as well as blow up walls, but good luck figuring out where to place them since there are no cracks in the walls to indicate where that can be done like later games. This game really forces you to rely on your intuition, trial and error, and a whole lot of patience. Other items, while serving niche purposes and helping you explore the world, were not so fortunate and did not make the series' permanent roster. Instead, they spend their days swearing that if Coach would have just put them in, they'd have won state. Sure you would have, Stepladder. Sure you would have. Due to the technical restraints of the NES, the dungeons are a little basic. Each room will require you to either defeat a few enemies to find a key, move a block to reveal a staircase, bomb a wall to open a new path, or some combination therein. The early dungeons are pretty easy, the enemies will fall over from a stiff gust of wind, and the puzzles are pretty trivial, but it teaches you what to expect without overwhelming you, as is the job of every game's first area. There are, of course, some annoyances. One thing that kind of pissed me off was this part where I walk through the door and instantly those Beyblade things hit me and I die. That's the kind of cheap stuff these old games are famous for. As you progress, the difficulty ramps up pretty quickly. Enemies get stronger and deal more damage, and if you didn't know you could upgrade your sword, well, good luck with that. Some of these combat-centric rooms are just brutal. Since every dungeon uses a single tile set, it can be a little disorienting. This is worsened by the fact that enemies constantly respawn, so if you get lost and are just kind of trying to find your way around, you'll have to keep either fighting enemies or running past them, likely taking damage in the process. Some rooms do have identifiable landmarks you can use to orient yourself, like some water or lava. There is, of course, a map and compass, but they only really show you the room layout and not the connections between them, so two adjacent rooms may be completely disjointed. One interesting thing about this game is that you can generally complete the dungeons in any order. There are some cases where you need an item from one dungeon to access or complete another, but you don't actually need to complete the dungeon where you found that item. There are no flags that trigger cutscenes or block your path or anything like that. Another quirk is that keys found in one dungeon can be used in another. You can even buy keys at the shop. I imagine that's really a way of ensuring players don't softlock themselves. I didn't even notice this until I'd already used a few keys from one dungeon in another, and the idea that I had bricked my playthrough did cross my mind. Boss fights were hit and miss for me. The dragon in the first level will shoot fireballs for you to dodge. It's a pretty significant step up in difficulty from the rest of the dungeon, but not what I'd call a challenge. The Gleeoks are probably the best boss fights in my opinion. Once more, you avoid fireballs, but this time you need to move in close to cut off the heads. The player may expect that once a head is removed, it's no longer a threat, but instead, the head now flies around the room and continues shooting fireballs. Adding in additional challenges and giving the player multiple threats to juggle as the fight progresses is great game design that we still see used all the time today. Then there are the stinkers like Dodongo. You need to place bombs on the ground and hope that Dodongo eats them, but due to its erratic movement patterns, it's pretty easy to just run out of bombs, and with no way to replenish them, you need to just come back later with more. The final battle against Ganon is pretty good too. Ganon will turn invisible and throw magic projectiles at you, and they come at you fast. You have very little time to get over there and put some damage on him yourself. He moves around a lot and still deals contact damage while invisible, which I found a little frustrating. Before too long, Ganon goes down, we collect the Triforce, we save Princess Zelda, get hit by some fire apparently. What happens if you die here? Guess you don't become the hero Hyrule like we do, sucker. Whew, well that was something. I wouldn't necessarily say I had a great time playing this, but there's definitely something here. The real magic of this game lies in its sense of discovery. While I appreciate a game pointing me in the right direction, there's nothing quite like the thrill of stumbling upon something completely on your own. The game thrives on those moments where something just clicks, whether it's uncovering a dungeon hidden under a random bush or piecing together a cryptic clue. It's a different kind of exploration than what you'll find in later Zelda titles, but no less rewarding. The Legend of Zelda built many of the pillars that one of gaming's most beloved franchises still stand on today, nearly 40 years later. Despite its limitations, it's still a game worth experiencing, if for nothing else but to see where it all began. You can strip away the dungeons, the bosses, or even the story, and a Zelda game is still a Zelda game. Because what that truly means is more abstract. It's about the adventure, the mystery, the sense that Hyrule is yours to discover. And that's the real legend of the Legend of Zelda. Dear viewers, I thank you once again and ask you to please like and subscribe and leave me a comment down below about what the Legend of Zelda means to you. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.